Today's theme of Doc NYC Pro, Shortlist Day, is co-presented by MTV. And throughout today, we're going to have 4 panels featuring many of the filmmakers who are on the Doc NYC shortlist. That is the section of the festival where we pick 15 films that we think are some of the strongest of the year. So stay tuned for those films or those panels. But we start every day with what we call the Morning Manifesto, where in a half hour we bring in someone that we admire a lot and try to distill their wisdom into 30 minutes of conversation. And today our guest is Liesl Copland from the William Morris Endeavor Agency. All right, let's hear it for Liesl.
I haven't said anything yet. You guys are amazing.
So I first got to know Liesl maybe 10 or 15 years ago when she was here in New York City working for Cinetic as a sales agent, doing a lot of work in the documentary space. Then she moved to Netflix in what we think of as its early days, before when it was still a company that we associated with red envelopes in our mailbox. And she had ran a division there that was their early foray into doing documentary originals. It was called Red Envelope, and it was an early iteration and tried out, then closed up before it became the Netflix of digital streaming that we know today. And for the last several years, Liesl has been at the William Morris Endeavor Agency, working on the financing and distribution of films with a great passion for documentaries. And Liesl, you've got a new initiative going on called Endeavor Content. Can you talk about what that is?
Yeah, sure. And thanks so much for having me, Tom. I can't believe that there's a human being that knows how to rattle off my career without reading from notes. So my parents can't do that. So thank you for being you. So yes, recently announced our company, after many years of acquiring companies, investing in companies, merging with other companies, first from Endeavor, William Morris becoming WME, the acquisition of IMG, which was a huge sports and television licensing, massive media business in very focused areas with 30 offices all over the world. We became WME IMG. And recently, with investments in things like the UFC to Miss Universe and everything in between, IMG Fashion, Fashion Week, and so forth, reorganized the company under a parent co, Endeavor, which was the original name of the agency started by Ari Emanuel and Patrick Weitzel many years ago, and others. And really kind of wanted to put the purpose of the word Endeavor back into our culture and into the name of the company. And with all the infrastructure that we as a company had amassed in the sales area, in the distribution area, specifically what was known as IMG television sales, which sold things like the Olympics and sports licensing rights of various events all over the world, Wimbledon, et cetera, coupled with an investment in a film sales company called Bloom, we took all of that distribution sales infrastructure and brought it into what was our traditional business of representing financiers, packaging and selling media, doing advisory work, and have created an Endeavor Content. And we, as Endeavor Content, have a now really deep belief and passion for nonfiction. We brought on, as we announced last week, Kevin Iwashina, who had been at Preferred Content and CAA for many years and also has a deep passion in the nonfiction space and an expert in that space, representing financiers and putting films together like Jiro Dreams of Sushi, which became Chef's Table, a series that we were involved with, has produced films, really knows the nonfiction space. And so I actually have another person to talk to now at the office about nonfiction. Kevin's here with us. I couldn't be more thrilled to be partnering with him.
Stand up, Kevin.
And stand up, Kevin, please. Right. Yes. Call Kevin, everyone. That is my message. But nonfiction, I think the good news is, and with events like this growing over many years, Tom's passion in working across many festivals, all of the insanely excellent work of you, the filmmakers in the room. I mean, the space is so vast and it's becoming so rich, and the ecosystem is becoming so successful, quite honestly, that we are now meeting you with our passion for the space, and we want to be packaging and finding financing options and developing nonfiction properties with you feature films, multi-part series, you name it, and I see a tremendous amount of artistic hybridization of the space happening, and so we are doubling down and really want to have a deeper practice in that space.
I want to jump right into a conversation you gave at the Toronto Film Festival 4 years ago. It was called "Show Us the Numbers." It's posted on my Twitter account. I posted it this morning, so you can catch up with it. It was covered in the New York Times, and at that point, 4 years ago, our field was in this transitional moment as distribution seemed to be moving into the digital space as the most prominent means for people to watch documentaries. 4 years later, we can say that transition is, complete. It's no longer what's going to happen here. This has happened. This is the world we're living in. And you honed in on the importance of data. Now, all this data exists about who is watching these films, but the people who create the films, us filmmakers, don't see that data. It's controlled by distribution companies. Can you talk about why that data is important and what you're thinking about it 4 years after you gave this rousing speech called "Show Us the Numbers"?
Sure. At the time, I think I talked a lot about, the emergence of, day and date and digital transactional and platforms like Netflix growing and having a lot of information about their users and what they were watching, and the sort of, lack of balance around having those insights available to people who are investing in, people that are selling and monetizing content, people that make the films. And I think it's still, there's this disturbing imbalance in that field to such a degree. I think it's a little bit more, there's a lot more information being utilized by distributors. That's the good news. I think that's a little bit uneven, and I think will continue, and I'm hopeful will emerge to a much greater state of health maybe in the next 3-4 years. But I mean, how many filmmakers are in the room? Stand up if you're a filmmaker. Just stand up. Okay. Now, of the standing group of filmmakers, raise your hand if you know the breakdown of the audience of the content that you've made. You have insights as to who the people are that have enjoyed it, why they enjoyed it, where they watched it, and if you can retarget those users for the next film that you've made. Sit back down if that is not true. Stand up if you have any of that information. And if you have any of that information, please give it to me. Okay? So 0. Okay, we're down at 0. So Facebook has all of that information. Google has all of that information. And I'm not a person that's going to rail against Facebook or Google. That would be ridiculous. They've put incredible investments into their businesses. And those insights are now a field where businesses can come up and utilize that information, even if we're going to pay for that information as the IP creators and owners, or I think the often not thought of people who put money into this content, right? The financiers, we represent many of them, and I think they're just as impassioned as you are as the filmmakers about the culture. But when we come time to make decisions with distribution partners and that information is unevenly distributed, we are in trouble because the people that have the information are maybe not being 100%, like they're not transferring it over to us. We need to transform more of that information somehow into the field of people that are making the content, who I think know a lot, instinctually, a lot about the content, what makes that content connect with audiences. And I can tell you one thing, that all of this sort of emergence of this new space is that the audience rules everything. The audience is smart. They can kill your movie in 8 to 24 hours. They can make your movie super successful even if you didn't do the right thing in marketing it, because they find it, they tell each other, all of that stuff we all know in our daily lives, right? But we're competing with story all day long, from 140 characters to news to things posted on Facebook, pictures and Instagram from your friends. And our stories have to be elevated, and they have to find reach, and we have to have some reliable metric to be able to find those audiences and bring them out to our content, right? And that is not quite a healthy ecosystem that I think is fair for the IP owners and the financiers of content to understand. So I don't necessarily have a silver bullet solution for that. I work in that area quite religiously because I sit in a lot of the digital media conversations inside my company and try and pull a lot of data into the space. But we all need to do that. We all need to share information as we have it from the releases of our films, or what connected with audiences, what worked. I think festivals are starting to get into the space of kind of pulling this data and trying to turn it over to us. I think we can all be a lot smarter if we're honest about that data, and if distributors and buyers and platforms who have a rich array of content in this space now can sort of talk to us more about that. I think it'll be a much better.
You know, I have to say, when I asked you to give this conversation 4 years ago, I had this kind of fantasy that was going to ignite this movement, that the creative community was going to band together and say, digital distributors, we're not doing business with you unless we get our data. That movement did not happen, and now I feel like there's 4 years of a status quo of filmmakers not getting their data, and that's the kind of new world we're living in.
Yeah, and I think, I heard a really smart executive at one of the digital platforms who is really going after documentaries now too, right? They're doing great work. I won't say who they are or what the executive is, but they'd come from theatrical and they're inside one of these platforms now. And they said just casually in a conversation with multiple producers and filmmakers that their decisions are 100% data-driven. So if the platforms are making those decisions and 100% ratio driven by data, and we're making 100% of our decisions by instincts and sort of picking dates and not necessarily knowing how to do what we do, then, I think that's a little bit problematic. And yes, I too had that sort of revolution is gonna come if I just say, everyone help, let's do this together. And that's a little bit utopian, and I think that, we can't do that. But I would say that I would encourage, and Thom and I have had this conversation privately, and I think that Doc NYC, companies like Go Watch It, there are a lot of companies out there that can start to now create tools for us all to use. And I think that we need to band together and think about how to, what are the things that we know, even if we don't have data about our film, like what worked, what didn't. Post-mortem with yourselves, post-mortem with your colleagues. Maybe there's a Wikipedia of that we can create. And again, not to get too utopian about it, but I too thought that was gonna happen, and it's slower than I'd like, but what I do have faith in is that things happen more slowly in 5 years than they should, but more rapidly in 10. And if you look at cycles of digital media and all the things in the business that we've seen being disrupted, I believe we're in that hockey stick of disruption right now, so I am optimistic.
Something else that I've talked about a lot over the years is filmmakers taking control over their work, taking control of their relationship with their audience. You've been involved in lots of different companies that have tried to create tools for that. What's your thinking currently about the filmmakers' ability to have a direct relationship with their audience?
I think it's possible. I think it's what you have to, if you're going to do that, you have to understand, like, this is the parameter around what you work in, right? If you say Harmony Korine, you kind of know the world that Harmony, the story world Harmony Korine lives in. Errol Morris, the same, right? So I think if you're willing to do that, and that's your way of approaching your material, then yes, like really have an Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, find out when someone distributes your movie, who's the mobile marketing and media buying entity that you used? Go meet those people, get insights. What are the best practices of how those companies are operating? You'll probably get some information for free, and then there'll be some wall somewhere where it's a business relationship you have to have. But I think you can educate yourselves, because I don't necessarily know what the answer is on how each of you out there or each filmmaker does that, but I know that endeavoring into that space will be meaningful in ways that we might not necessarily 100% be able to predict, right? So I think, I was at the Sundance Producer Summit this summer, and we were on a panel, a group of us were on a panel, and I sort of said, people always say on panels, know your audience. Okay, how can I know my audience if you don't let me know my audience when you take my content and release it to an audience? And I think, I think you just have to sort of study the patterns and just start and not know where the end is, leap without the net, and get into those conversations like the enterprising group of individuals that I know you are in this room. Because I think the power really is in this room, right? We are in a situation where every channel now, right, every platform, and I think even the theatrical space is still incredibly healthy if done smartly. And if we think about the entire ecosystem as one, right? someone was lamenting to me that they released a drama on a fiction narrative that didn't work, and it had all the tea leaves of why it should work. And it came out of the Toronto Film Festival in the fall, and then it just didn't deliver. And I said, well, did you think about the fact that it's a drama and you released it in the middle of when every single television network is releasing all of their dramas back onto television, and you're competing with that content? So it's impossible today to say I can draw down information from all of these areas at once and then, I can just make a 100% data-driven decision. But I think we have to start to infiltrate the people and the executives and make friends with them who know what these things are, and get anecdotal information and just begin to share those best practices in some way that you can help us with, Tom.
So today's theme is called Shortlist Day. It is very much part of the conversation of award season, which becomes a bigger and bigger part of the film marketplace every year. Ultimately, there's only one film that's going to win an Oscar. There's only 5 films that are going to get nominated. So it's kind of a peculiar dynamic, because there's lots of people and money chasing something that only gets bestowed on very few people. How do you see that dynamic in your world as you're helping shepherd films along? What's the good side and what's the bad side, and how should we be thinking about it?
It's a good question, and I'll tread very carefully here. I have to think about how I do this. I think the dynamic has reached saturation, right? And I think if you read the news, you see that the Academy had a record number of documentaries in the, qualified in that category, something like 170 films, if I'm correct, this year, which is a record high. And I think if we can all agree not to think of documentaries as niche anymore, we can maybe study how we can more precisely use the awards timeframe, and how we can maybe communicate with the Academy, because I think they have a tremendously difficult job, and they revise the rules every year to try and make this a sane system. But I do think there are elements of it that are a bit fraught, right? So we have everybody who is in my space has multiple films that they're trying to get qualified for the shortlist every year. And the amount of campaigning and effort that you have to kind of engineer, and the specialists that you have to hire, who are all just exceptional individuals, so good at their jobs and deeply committed and passionate about the space, that infrastructure is overwrought. It can't sustain all of the wonderful content. And I say it like this. I say it to every doc filmmaker. I say it to every releasing buyer, platform, distributor, that everything in the space is excellent, right? All of you who have made the films and are passionate and are trying to find ways to communicate with audiences in innovative ways, like every single piece of content that I see is excellent. And yet we can't bottleneck it all into the system and just expect that system is, again, maybe needs to be more data-driven. Maybe it should track every voter and only allow a vote to happen if everyone who's supposed to see movies has actually seen them. And maybe you should be required to show up to a theater to see it, just like, and I don't malign the Academy at all. I think they have an insanely challenging job here. But I want to have some sort of summit talks about how this might need to be examined and improved upon. I think it's unsustainable bottleneck. And I think it would also help if things like the HFPA were to sort of reinstate a documentary category for the Golden Globes, and for both series and features, right? And they had one in the 70s, and I don't malign them either. I mean, they have to focus, and everyone's got to do their jobs, and I think that's a really great mechanism that brings a lot of content to the fore. But and other awards categories like the IDA Awards and the Spirit Awards and the Cinema Eye Awards and now the Critics' Choice Awards, these things are becoming more and more important. But if we could just somehow examine this and maybe find other times of year to create less of a bottleneck where these awards categories were given, then it might relieve a lot of pressure on the system.
Just an observation about that. I think it's absurd how much time we spend talking about the Oscars. On the other hand, I recognize that it's also this kind of marketing tool that even if your film doesn't become one of those nominated films, it creates this momentum to have extra screenings, for audiences to be talking about it. We had an insanely difficult job coming up with the 15 films on the short list. There's easily another 30 films that were worthy of consideration, probably more. And I hope that those films generate conversation by being the underdogs who weren't on the short list, to the extent that conversation happens. But I think that we do need some other ways of talking about things.
Yeah, I think again, if we can sort of think of it like this is not a niche category and we only win by critics and awards, like if we have a deeper understanding of audiences, I think that will relieve some pressure on it. I completely agree. And I'm so grateful that the Academy is so supportive in documentaries, and that, through the process of even the voting and nominating, that the wider Academy at large, that people on the actor side and director side and special effects and things like that get to know about this content category. And it's certainly, the Critic Watch version of it is a very powerful mechanism as well. And I think if you look at all the prognosticating that happens each year, so many of the different critics and bloggers that we rely on to really understand the space, they all disagree with each other this year. It's like no front runner, who knows? And that's great because there is so much that's so worthy. But it's just sort of like, what else? It's all positive, but what else can we do to improve upon it? And I wish, believe me, I'll be thinking about those solutions and talking certainly to you about them. So we'll hopefully come back next year and have some for you.
So we talk about, there's a big part of distribution is marketing a film, and in a way, I think marketing gets lumped into talking about distribution, but deserves to be talked about separately. Last spring, we had a day-long conference called the NYC Marketing Boot Camp, and we want to do more things like that because I feel like half of a filmmaker's job is making the film, but the other half is getting it to an audience. And I feel like we've got a lot of knowledge about how to make films, and we've got graduate programs that teach you how to make a film. There's not a lot of attention paid to how to get your film to an audience and how to market films. What are you seeing in the marketing space for films?
I think literally the only thing we should be talking about for the next 5 years in any film or piece of content, regardless of format, and especially in the documentary category, is marketing, right? And I think understanding that how important it is with how much great content, and again, how much story, if I put it in quotes, we're competing with for audiences. Audiences can just sit back and be super entertained all day. I mean, with what's going on in the media space right now, I mean, or politically, like, how do we get people to say, oh, I have to lean forward, step out of my house, step out of this maelstrom of information, step out of how overloaded and anxious I might be about it, and how can I commune with others around something really visionary that someone wanted to tell me this story, right? And so, understanding how to, and I think, different models look very different, and we have to study what types of films might be best served in what type of model, because we have to think about, thank God for Netflix, right? How many documentaries they're making and acquiring and marketing, but they have a system which helps that content find the audiences inside their system. But you and I also want the film to be, received by a wider audience, reading the newspapers, reading blogs, and create awareness, because we're trying to move the needle in the culture. And I think the great news is that leaning into documentary right now, the audiences everywhere are looking for the truth. It's so important, the truth, and you are the truth tellers in this room. So we have to really get so granular about elements of marketing, right? So I heard yesterday at the final year premiere here in New York last night that Magnolia Pictures, who I think, to me, the most astonishing thing that happened in the documentary space in the past year is the release of I'm Not Your Negro, right? And how successful that movie was. To me, it's the biggest theatrical release of the year, bar none, any category, because of how just over-indexing that movie was, right? I would love for Eamon Bowles, and I'm not gonna put them on the spot, but everyone in Magnolia to come talk for 3 hours about...
We did a case study on I'm Not Your Negro at the marketing boot camp last.
Was it 3 hours?
No, it wasn't 3 hours.
Okay, let's do 3 hours, okay? So, but point being, like, so the final year, they're releasing it on January 19th, okay? Brilliant. You have to eventize the movie. You have to make it compulsory for someone to want to come and see it then, not 3 months later on whatever other platform it might be able to be enjoyed on, because people have so many choices, right? And I think that if you're releasing a film on National Geographic or on Netflix or on Hulu, you have to do the same thing, right? Because when you do, Hulu released a film onto their platform 5 days after it went to theaters, the Beatles movie, and while it was on Hulu, it still did $3 million in the box office. That's insane. That's amazing. So what are the mechanics of that moment that became so important to that film that we need to better understand, right? I think mobile marketing and gaming, there are companies that can game Facebook about how to get people to pause in their scrolling and engage on a piece of content. And if you engage on it for a certain number of seconds, my understanding is like the costs of that medium might go down, right? So what are those insights that we can start to understand, and how do we engineer the content, marketing content related to our longer form content that is makes it compulsory to see the film? Not just, sometimes those assets, if you see marketing assets out in the world, you see a trailer, you were entertained watching something for 2 to 3 minutes, you don't necessarily need to go see the long form version of it, right? Let's not do that. Let's do things where you get people to engage with you. We have to create activity. It's a dynamic universe marketing. It's a relationship between your ideas and the piece of content that you made, and an audience has to engage. So, you know, we have to study that. We have to look at, you know, the levels to which these great platforms and our partners out there, you know, I see Nat Geo with LA92 and Jane, what they're doing. And I was at the Hollywood Bowl watching Jane with the live orchestra. It's amazing, right? And then I see, again, I'm Not Your Negro, and I have great hopes for the final year. And then I see what Netflix is doing with all the wonderful pieces of content. And they work their butts off, taking, you know, huge high-end creators like Ava DuVernay and Steven Spielberg are making documentary content, nonfiction content, right? So, you know, but marketing is sort of everything, because discoverability is a nightmare. And you don't know where to look for things as an audience, and it can just pass and you'll never know it was there. Oh, did that company release that film? Like, oh yeah, they spent $10 million marketing it. Huh? You know, so like we're all drilled down in these balkanized little areas, so we have to re-explore what marketing means in this ecosystem.
All right. Well, that is our time up. Our time is up for our morning manifesto. That went fast. We will be back in future years with Liesl Copland. We're going to take a short break right now while we reset our stage for our next panel. Thank you all for being here, and thanks especially to Liesl Copland.